I used to think peace had a sound. The faint rustle of wind through the oak trees that lined the edge of my property, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, and the low hum of cicadas at dusk were it for me. That fence, my fence, stood like a quiet sentinel, marking the line between what was mine and what wasn't. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was order, security, and the boundary that gave my home its meaning. Every evening after work I'd lean against it, mug of coffee in hand, watching the sky melt from orange to deep purple. It was ordinary, boring even. But that's the thing about peace. You never realize how fragile it is until someone decides to shatter it. At first, the whispers came from the street, complaints that someone was too particular about their property lines, that someone wasn't very neighborly. I shrugged it off. Neighbors gossip. It's what they do. But there was a sharpness in their tone, like knives waiting for the right chance to cut. And then there was her, Karen. She lived on the opposite side of the fence, and if fences made for good neighbors, then she was evidence that some people couldn't stand boundaries in any way. The first time she locked eyes with me across the yard, it was the kind of stare that told you she wasn't just looking at you, she was sizing you up, calculating what she could take and how much she could get away with. I felt it deep in my chest, though I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. The days that followed were filled with little things, small sharp intrusions that most people would ignore, but I noticed every single one. She'd step too close to the fence line, drag her trash cans across my gravel like it was hers, glare if I parked my truck too close to her side of the curb. The fence presented a challenge, as if it was not a barrier at all, but I didn't say anything. No, not yet. Because, in my mind, I still resided in that tranquil setting where respect for one another's homes and boundaries were valued. I clung to that belief the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this wasn't just neighborly tension. This wasn't a misunderstanding waiting to be solved with a polite conversation. This was a war's opening scene. And the initial conflict? You can tell a lot about a person by how they carry themselves. It would be fought on the line that held my world together. The fence that was about to fall. Some people move like the world is heavy on their shoulders, bent by invisible burdens. Others walk as if they have never been tested, careless and light. And then there are people like Karen. People who walk as though the earth itself owes them space. She wasn't loud, at least not at first. She was not required to be. Karen had a presence that invaded before she even spoke. The first time she introduced herself, it wasn't really an introduction. It was an inspection. She looked me up and down, eyes narrowing at the way I kept my lawn trimmed, at the way my fence stood tall and straight like a soldier at attention. She said, "Nice fence," but her tone was off. Not admiration, not even politeness. More like accusation. She appeared to be asking, "Why do you think you deserve something I don't have?" I laughed it off, forced a smile, tried to be neighborly. But that was the first time I realized Karen wasn't just a woman living next door. She was a storm in human form. Brewing slowly, waiting for a chance to break. It started small. Her garden hose would be left coiled just above the line, snaking into my grass. A few times I found her trimming her hedges from my side of the fence. She'd shrug when I caught her. "Just easier from here," she'd say, like my property was her shortcut. One evening, as the sun bled low over the rooftops, I caught her leaning on the fence, running her hand along the top like she was measuring it. I asked her if something was wrong. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and tipped her head. "And just thinking," she said, "this fence of yours, it really blocks access." Access. That was the phrase that stayed with me like a thorn I couldn't get rid of. Access to what? The area behind her yard consisted solely of unruly brush and an unoccupied, neglected alley. Nobody needed access there. Nobody but her. The more I tried to ignore it, the more she pushed. Little Barb slipped into casual conversation. "You know, fences make people selfish. It's funny how some people think they own every inch of dirt they walk on. Property lines are so flexible, don't you think?" I began to sleep less. Not because she had done anything drastic yet, but because I could feel it building. Pressure behind a dam. A mute silence that hinted at violence. And then came the day she stood in my driveway, hands on her hips, as bold as if she lived there. "I'm just letting you know," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "If you won't make room for access, I'll handle it myself." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell her she was out of her mind. But deep down I knew she meant it. Additionally, people like Karen keep their promises, not out of honor, but out of spite. It happened on a Saturday morning, the kind of day that should have been ordinary. The air was crisp, sunlight dripping through the trees, and for a moment I almost believed the world was still the safe, predictable place I remembered. But then I heard it, the sharp, metallic scream of a saw cutting through wood. I initially believed I was imagining it. Maybe a neighbor doing some repairs. However, the noise was too close, too familiar. It was my fence screaming. I ran outside, heart pounding in my chest. And there she was. Karen. Her face was twisted with the kind of determination that only comes from someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. She was standing on my property with her hands firmly on a buzzing saw. A portion of the fence had already been removed.
Just gone.
Broken and splintered, the boards were dispersed on the ground like corpses. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I yelled. She didn't flinch, did not pause at all. She looked at me with that smug tilt of her chin, eyes burning with something between triumph and defiance. "I told you," she said, voice steady, almost casual. "This fence blocks access. I also require access. Need." That word ripped through me. Since when does need give someone the right to take what isn't theirs? I could feel my nails cutting into my palms as my fists curled so tightly. Every instinct in me screamed to rip that saw out of her hands, to rebuild the fence with her arrogance nailed shut inside it. But I froze. Not because I was weak, because I was stunned. There are moments in life where reality bends, where you realize you've stepped into a nightmare that doesn't make sense. One of those moments was witnessing my fence, my property, and my peace collapse under her control. The neighbors started to gather. A few peeked from behind curtains, others lingered at the edge of their driveways. I could hear the whispers already. She warned him. He should have listened. It is merely a fence, just a fence. No, it was more than just a fence. It was the line between order and chaos, and she had just declared war by cutting it down. I yelled, my voice low and trembling with anguish that I could hardly contain. "Put it back!" She smirked. Actually smirked. "You don't own the right to stop me." And with that she turned away, leaving my yard littered with the wreckage of what used to be the symbol of my sanctuary. I stood there long after the saw went silent, staring at the empty gap in the fence, the hole that now cut straight through my sense of safety. That's when I felt something break inside of me, but not in the way that the fence did, with splinters and noise, but quietly, deep within my bones, because I realized that her game wasn't over here. It was only the beginning. Nights became the hardest part. I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling as I listened to my own house's silence and felt it press down on me like a weight. The fence was gone, but in my mind I could still hear it falling. Every splinter snapping like a gunshot. Every board crashing like thunder. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, my thoughts circled the same questions over and over. How could she? How could she stand in broad daylight on my property and destroy what was mine? Worse still, why was everyone acting as though it didn't matter? Neighbors whispered, but nobody stepped in. A few even shrugged it off. "It's just a fence," they said. But they didn't get it. They couldn't. That fence was based on principles, not wood. It was the one thing that stood between order and chaos. And Karen had used only arrogance and a power saw to destroy that principle. I found myself pacing the house, clenching my fists, imagining confrontations I never had the courage to stage. I would imagine myself yelling at her and demanding that she rebuild each plank she tore down. Her smug smile would finally vanish, and I would see her pale face. But when morning came, all I saw was the empty gap where my fence had once stood. A slit was created by that gap, a constant reminder that I had been violated and that she had won. Every day, I'd see her walking past it, her expression smug, as though the absence of my fence was a trophy she carried everywhere she went. She would occasionally make comments that were audible to me. "So much easier now without that ridiculous barrier." Finally, some proper access. Access. That word again. It followed me like a shadow, whispering in my ear at the worst possible times. I tried to live a normal life by going through the motions. Work, chores, sleep. But nothing felt real, because home didn't feel like home anymore. It felt exposed, vulnerable, and I hated myself for letting her do that to me. I saw my reflection in the window one night. I had dark circles under my eyes, a tight jaw, and bulging veins in my neck. I barely remembered who I was. That was the night I realized something had to change. I could keep being the victim. I could keep pacing, keep losing sleep, keep drowning in anger and helplessness. Or I could turn it around. I could fight back, but not the way she expected. Not with shouting matches or petty arguments. No, I needed something bigger, something that would make her feel the same helplessness she had carved into me. The fence was gone, but the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. And in the shadows of my sleepless nights, a plan started to form. It started with a letter, a plain white envelope buried in a stack of junk mail, almost invisible, almost nothing. If I hadn't been so restless, I might have tossed it out with the flyers and credit card offers. But that night, after pacing the house for hours, I tore open every piece of mail on my counter just to give my hands something to do. And then I saw it. County auction notice is written in large black letters at the top. I skimmed the page at first, not really caring. Tax delinquent properties, old lots, little slivers of land nobody wanted. But then there it was. A line of text that froze me where I stood. Parcel 17B. Residential boundary adjoining Lot 24. Lot 24. Karen's lot. I read it again and again. My pulse quickened, the words burning brighter with every pass. Parcel 17B wasn't just some forgotten piece of dirt. It was hers, or at least it had been. Now, because of unpaid taxes, it was slipping through her fingers. And suddenly, unbelievably, it was within my reach. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands. My mind raced faster than I could control. This wasn't coincidence. This was justice, delivered not with fists or screaming matches, but with ink and paper, with laws she couldn't bend. I imagined the look on her face when she realized the truth, that the very ground she fought to claim, the land she had humiliated me over, would belong to me, not out of rage, not through force, but with time and patience. For the first time in weeks I laughed, not the bitter, hollow laugh I'd forced out to keep from breaking down. A real laugh, the kind that shook my chest and left me gasping for air. I had the impression that the universe had given me a weapon, and all I had to do was wield it. The next morning I drove to the courthouse. My boots heard the echoes of the building's stone-columned steps as it loomed large. The auction office was quiet inside, quiet that made it feel like secrets were just waiting to be told. For the first time in weeks, I held my hand steady as I signed my name on the registration form. The clerk slid a folder across the counter. She said, "Parcel 17B," without looking. I took it, and in that moment I swear the air shifted around me. The world for once tilted in my favor. Karen had taken my fence, but I was about to take her foundation. The courthouse auction room was smaller than I expected. Just a handful of chairs, a podium, and the steady shuffle of papers in the clerk's hands. But to me it felt like an arena, the kind of place where fate was decided and battles were won with numbers and nerve rather than weapons. I sat near the front, my registration paddle clutched tight in my hands. The wood was smooth, but my palms were slick with sweat. My heart hammered like a drum line in my chest, each beat louder than the last. The auctioneer, a man in a faded gray suit, cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. His voice was steady, practiced, the kind of voice that had seen 1,000 deals made and 1,000 dreams broken. He declared, "Parcel 17B, residential boundary adjoining Lot 24. $1,000 was the initial bid." My head snapped up. There it was, the property line. The property line of Karen. The room was still. Nobody moved. Nobody cared about a sliver of land most people wouldn't even notice. But to me it wasn't just dirt. It was justice. I paddled higher. 1,000, the auctioneer confirmed. For a heartbeat I thought that was it. That the universe had finally made something easy. But then, like a knife through the silence, I heard her voice. Karen. She was there, standing in the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes burning into me like fire. She raised her own paddle, her lips curling into a smile I knew too well. 1,500, the auctioneer called. The room tilted. My breath caught. Of course she was here. Of course she wouldn't let go without a fight. I swallowed hard, forcing my hand steady as I lifted the paddle again. 2,000! The auctioneer nodded. 2,000? Do I hear 25? Karen didn't hesitate. 2,055. She seemed to be daring me to continue with her sharp, almost happy voice. I could feel the eyes of the room on us now, strangers sensing the tension, realizing this wasn't just business. This was combat. 3,000, I said, my voice louder than I intended. 3,500, she snapped back. The numbers went up. 4,000. 4,500. 5,000. Each bid hit me like a punch to the chest. Each counter from her was a slap across the face. I could see the sweat on her temple now, the twitch of her jaw. Because she was concerned about the land, she was not present. She was here because she couldn't stand the idea of me winning. And that was when I realized this wasn't about money anymore. This dealt with perseverance. Who would hesitate first? The auctioneer's voice rang out again. 6,000. Do I hear 65? I looked at Karen, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor. Her eyes darted, her fingers tightened on the paddle. She was on the verge of breaking. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my paddle. 7,000. The room went still. Karen's lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Her paddle wavered. Her eyes burned into me with pure hatred, but she didn't raise it. 7,000 a single time. 7,000 twice. The gavel slammed down. Sold. The word rang in my ears like victory. It was done by me. I had taken back control, not just of the land, but of the story she thought she controlled. For the first time since she cut down my fence, I could breathe. The paper still smelled like fresh ink when I carried it home. The deed, folded crisp inside a manila envelope. My hands shook as I held it, not from fear but from the electric current of victory running through me. I didn't plan the confrontation. Not really. But fate did. It happened the very next afternoon. Karen was in her yard, barking orders at a landscaper she'd hired, gesturing wildly toward the very strip of land I now owned. Her voice carried sharp across the air like a blade. No, closer to the line. That's my access. Don't you dare leave a gap. Neighbors lingered nearby, drawn to the commotion like moths to flame. I could see them peeking from porches, leaning against mailboxes, waiting for the next spark. I stepped forward, the envelope in my hand. My boots crunched against the gravel, every step deliberate, heavy, like the soundtrack of a final showdown. Karen. She turned, annoyance etched across her face. What? I held up the envelope. This. She frowned, confused for half a second before her arrogance snapped back into place. What is that supposed to be? Another grievance? Another little tantrum about your precious fence? I was silent. No, not yet. Instead, I slid the deed out slowly, the paper catching the sunlight. Even the neighbors leaned in closer with wide eyes as I let the silence continue. This, I finally said, my voice steady, is the deed to parcel 17B. Her expression faltered, merely for a moment. But I saw it, the momentary glimmer of fear in her eyes. That's my property line, she stammered. Not anymore. I stepped closer, the paper trembling only slightly in my grip. You misplaced it. Taxes, auction. And I bought it. The landscaper froze mid-dig. The people nearby gasped. Karen's face drained of color, then flushed bright red as the weight of it sank in. She yelled, You can't do that, her voice rising and shrill. You can't. I can, I cut her off. And I did. You removed my fence to gain access. Now every step you take across that line is mine. Every nail you hammer, every blade of grass you touch. You answer to me. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. She looked around, desperate for someone to take her side. However, the neighbors simply observed in silence. Some smirked. Some shook their heads. She was supported by no one. For once, she had no power. I tucked the deed back into the envelope, folded it under my arm, and turned to walk away. Her voice cracked behind me, shrill, broken, and desperate. This isn't over. But it was. We both recognized it. The storm she unleashed had finally circled back, and this time it was her standing in the wreckage. The world felt different after that day. I had been walking around with a storm inside of me for weeks. Anger, insomnia, and the taste of bitterness that never left my mouth. But the moment that deed was in my hands, the moment Karen realized she had lost, something shifted. She didn't care about the wood she cut down. It wasn't about the gap in my yard. It was about principle, about respect, about drawing a line and knowing it meant something. Neighbors still talk about it. Sometimes when I step outside, I catch the nods, the quiet smiles. Now that Karen has swung her saw, people who never spoke to me look at me differently, like I fought back against the madness they were afraid to confront. Karen also? She's quieter now, not gone. People like her never disappear completely, but smaller. The woman who once strutted with her chin high and her voice sharp now avoids my eyes when we cross paths. She no longer lingers near the fence line. She doesn't talk about access, because deep down she knows. Every inch she tried to steal, every boundary she tried to erase, it all came back to me in the end. Sometimes, late at night, I stand at the edge of my property where the fence once stood. The wood is still gone, but I don't see a gap anymore. I see victory. I see proof that you don't always need fists or fury to win. Sometimes you just need patience, timing, and the courage to strike when the moment comes. I look back on those nights I spent pacing the floor, drowning in helplessness, and I wish I could tell that version of me one thing: hold tight. Justice is on its way. Because here's the truth. Boundaries matter. Respect is important. And if someone thinks they can take what is yours and tear down your walls without being punished, they are mistaken. Sometimes karma doesn't come on its own. Sometimes you have to meet it halfway. So, to anyone listening, if you've got your own Karen in your life, someone who pushes, someone who disrespects, someone who thinks they can walk all over you, don't give up. Don't let them win. Because one day the gavel will slam, and the victory will be yours.